Welcome to Republican China, the first country, the founding of the Republic of China in 1912, the first country formally to be called China, a new country built on the bedrock of an ancient civilization. It's not easy to start a new country. Until the last few years, much of the history of Republican China was written almost exclusively with an idea of looking toward its end, how the communists won and how others didn't. There's, in much of the early historiography, an aura of inevitability about the ultimate communist triumph, with the result that the years of the Republic of China are defined as only 1911 to 1949, as a kind of an interregnum between dynasties, and that the real heir to the Qing did not come along until Mao Zedong, as Fairbank called him, the Red Emperor, settled into the Zhongnanhai near the Forbidden City. This is an assumption that is now increasingly under debate, as the great disasters of the first decades of communist rule on the mainland become increasingly obvious, a period when the rest of Asia went forward while China went backward. And it's debated in part because of the success of the Republic of China on Taiwan, where the Republic of China has flown a flag longer than ever it did on the Chinese mainland. So a question to ask, is this period, 1911 to 49, just a waiting period? Or is it one of real alternatives for China after the fall of empire? There are many ways of addressing this question. One of them is to look at the evolution of the modern Chinese state and continuities between regimes over time, and how they tried to shape their domestic and international environments. Or we could look more into the realm of attempted cultural change, efforts to make Chinese culture and to remake Chinese culture as a precondition for remaking Chinese society. But today we want to look at three prominent alternatives for modern China, all of them problematic, but all of them highlighting the difficulties facing any modern Chinese government. We've seen the coming apart of the old order in the 19th century from a combined whirlwind of 内乱外患, of internal rebellion and foreign invasion. And we've witnessed the final collapse of the Daqingguo, the Great Qing Empire. The imperial system, not just the Great Qing Empire, but the imperial system, a 2,000-year-old system, ended apparently for good in 1911 and 1912. Although one might argue that in some ways it really ended in 1905, when the examination system was finished. That system had defined in many ways the social support of dynasties for nearly 1,000 years, from the Song right through to the Qing, and the great enduring success of the later imperial age is simply inconceivable without it. But it was done away with in 1905 because what it tested, and what people therefore learned, was deemed useless, or at best irrelevant, to the central issues of the 20th century. And when it ended, a distinctly Chinese tradition of what a bureaucracy is also came to an end. Think of it, this ancient system, which had trained a millennium of young scholars in what you might call a state ideology, and then recruited the best and brightest in the world that mattered in the realm to state service in China, this was now done away with, but it was not replaced. After it was gone, there would be no standard way by which Chinese governments could recruit the brightest, the most ambitious people in the realm to work for them. 6 years later, when the boy Emperor Pui abdicated, the monarchy was also done away with. If the bureaucracy with its links to the gentry had been the social foundation of the imperial system, the emperorship was both the ultimate authority and the necessary symbol of the entire operation. With the bureaucracy redefined and the emperor gone, the third leg of the imperial system, that combination of political philosophy, social hierarchy, and moral values that we lump together as Confucianism, this wasn't gone yet, but it too would come under very strong attack within a decade and indeed be held responsible for all of China's modern backwardnesses. The absence of these essential elements of the old regime meant that the transition from Qing rule would be much different from other dynastic transitions, for example, from Ming to Qing, for there was no automatic agreement as to what a new dynasty ought to look like. And there was another reason why this would be a transition with a big difference. In the past, when dynasties collapsed and political disintegration was in full swing, The social order very often remained intact. The gentry elite intact, ready to realign itself with the new center. In other words, an empire could disintegrate politically and reintegrate itself along familiar lines. That did not happen in the 20th century because China not only fell apart politically, it fell apart and changed profoundly socially as well. So even if everyone had wanted to restore the old system, it was not going to work because the old society that had propped up the monarchy had changed. For example, from the upper gentry and merchant families, we have the beginning of an incipient bourgeoisie, a business class running light industry, commercial ventures, either independently or with foreign partners. Cotton mills, coal mines, steamship lines, modern banks, even cigarette companies. These new industries and the ones that the foreigners founded also in the treaty ports gave rise to another new class, an urban industrial working class, a proletariat, which grows and grows and grows in the big cities like Shanghai in the first half of the 20th century. Out of the ranks of the former upper gentry would come another class, a new class of scholars, no longer tied to the state, no longer scholar officials, but what we might think of as an intelligentsia, professional intellectuals, those whose learning is now attested to not by the old examination system, although some of them did have exam degrees from the old system, but by Western PhDs. And unlike earlier scholars who trained to think of themselves as omnicompetent, these new ones were people with specialized, not universal knowledge. They had PhDs in geology, economics, philosophy. There was no automatic role in government for this newly trained elite, but it still carried with it enormous prestige. And this is a group that begins to learn about and experiment with new political and social ideas. There's another new group, which for lack of a better term I will call studentdom. Students who gather in China's new universities, which begin to form in the 1890s. They become an active part politically of this new intelligentsia, and they demand a say in the running of the country. By 1915, there's some 4 million students of all sorts, and for the first time, some of them are women. Now, there's one thing very important worth noting about all of these classes. They're all urban classes. And this marks another challenge for Chinese political integration or reintegration in the 20th century. The growing division of China into two worlds, the urban and more modern-minded, the cities where new classes made their marks, and the rural areas where change came more slowly, except for those many millions who left the countryside to emigrate into the cities. So when you put all this together, this process of reintegration, founding this new country, this Republic of China, was going to be much more difficult than simply establishing a new dynasty. One has in these groups that are not so much mutually antagonistic, rather than mutually independent. What could bring them together into a working new society?